We start in Gaza, where the Hamas-led Health Authority says at least 25 people have been killed and another 50 wounded by Israeli shelling on a camp for displaced people near the southern city of Rafah. Relatives of those killed in one of the strikes near a Red Cross field hospital say Israeli forces fired a second time, and that blast killed people who were coming out of their tents. Israel's military says the incident is under review and is looking into potential strikes at the locations reported by emergency workers. Meanwhile, Israel says it has carried out a number of strikes on Hezbollah targets across the border in southern Lebanon. The Israeli army says the strikes were in retaliation for attacks carried out by Iran-backed militia in northern Israel. Since the October 7 terror attacks and Israel's subsequent war with Hamas, there have been daily clashes between the Israeli army, Hezbollah, and allied groups in the border area between Israel and Lebanon. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he's deeply concerned about the cross-border hostilities.
The risk for the conflict in the Middle East to widen is real and must be avoided. One rash move, one miscalculation could trigger a catastrophe that goes far beyond the border and, frankly, beyond imagination. Let's be clear. The people of the region and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
Let's talk more about all this with Mairav Zonszein in Tel Aviv. She works for the International Crisis Group, an NGO with the self-imposed goal of preventing wars worldwide. Welcome to DW. Let me start with my first question. You just heard that stark warning from the UN Secretary General. The world, in short, can't afford another Gaza in Lebanon. How close are we to that right now?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me. In some ways, we've been close to that for nearly 9 months now, since Hezbollah opened up a second front after the Hamas attack. And like he said, any miscalculation at any moment could strike a bigger war. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we've been at this daily for 8 months, and it's remarkable that it hasn't deteriorated into more escalation. And I think that's a testament to the fact that neither side is interested in an all-out war. So the question is, how do we get the quiet? And I think at this point, even if Israel doesn't like it, it is linked to a ceasefire in Gaza, which is something that Israel's leader has refused to do, even to get the hostages back. But at this point in time, Hezbollah has been quite clear that that would be the prerequisite for at least the beginning of a de facto quiet on the northern border. And until that happens, we will continue to be in a situation that at any point in time, it could break out into further escalation.
Hezbollah, of course, is allied with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but is considered much more powerful. How would a war with Hezbollah differ from the one we're all watching in real time with Hamas?
It would be absolutely devastating for both sides. It was a devastating war in 2006 for both sides, but primarily in Lebanon. And Hezbollah has amassed itself a huge amount of precise weaponry and munitions, and it has been testing out those weapons in Israel and testing Israel's defense systems. And frankly, also after 8 months of war on two fronts, Israel is not really prepared, I think, for this kind of escalation. And it's also a question, what would it achieve if it invaded Lebanon? And how long would that last? But either way, Israel has promised to destroy Beirut. Hezbollah has said that it could invade the Galilee, which is in northern Israel. It would be catastrophic for both sides in a situation in which you already have displaced persons, you already have people being injured, being killed. It would be possibly also a wider regional war. The U.S. could be dragged in. It would be a disaster.
Mairav, this past week in Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spelled out the paradox of this conflict. Quite simply, it's a war nobody wants, not Israel, not Hezbollah, and certainly not the Lebanese. So why, nevertheless, are we heading in that direction, at least?
Well, I think Hezbollah has decided to link the two fronts, and I think that that link is now cemented, and Israel understands that and needs to decide how it wants to position itself. And so far, it has allowed the operation in Gaza, despite the fact that it has made no strategic breakthrough, to continue, even at the expense of what's happening on its northern border, even without providing any kind of plan or timeline for the tens of thousands of citizens who want to go back to their homes. So, I think this is it's definitely the onus is on Hezbollah and on the axis of resistance, which has decided that it will keep up the pressure on Israel as long as it is in hostilities in Gaza. But it's also on Israel to decide on a strategic plan and a policy for the future security of its citizens. This is something that has to do also with its occupation and continued military control over the Palestinian people, which is something that many countries in the Middle East are not willing to tolerate, but also in terms of how Israel understands its future, if it wants to continue with war or if it wants to try at least to pursue a path of diplomacy,
right,
which it hasn't done for a very long time.
That's Mairav Zonszein in Tel Aviv from the International Crisis Group. Really appreciate your time and your perspective.
Thank you.